Sometimes, a person becomes the very thing they are trying to escape from. Listen carefully. This sentence is not meant to comfort you. When someone fights against the thing that is ruining their life, they often end up adopting its methods without noticing. They learn the language of the pain they are running from. They begin to think, react, and speak through the same logic as the darkness they are trying to leave behind. And slowly, almost quietly, the enemy is no longer outside. It moves inward. It becomes familiar. It becomes convincing. And most dangerously, it begins to sound reasonable. Now let us approach the real question, slowly and without rushing to explain it away. Why does a person repeat the same behaviors even when they know those behaviors are harmful? Why do they enter relationships that wound them again and again? Why do they hesitate or pull back at the exact moment things start to improve? Why do they make choices that complicate their lives just when there is a real possibility of healing? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why, while doing this, do they not feel entirely helpless, yet also not fully responsible? This question opens the door to humanity's oldest conflict with itself. Because once this question is asked, pointing outward becomes difficult. Circumstances, people, the past, fate, each explanation works for a while, and then it doesn't. Eventually they all fall short. What remains is the person standing alone with their own decisions. And when people are left alone with themselves, they often want to escape. Because this encounter is darker than they expected, and far more uncomfortable than blaming the world. This is exactly where Dostoyevsky's understanding of the human being begins. In his world, people are not simple. They are not merely good-hearted individuals who make mistakes. His characters are capable of deliberately interfering with their own lives. Not accidentally, not unconsciously, but through a quiet, internal agreement with their darker impulses. Because human beings do not only desire happiness, they also feel a strange, persistent loyalty to pain, especially if that pain is familiar, especially if it once served as a refuge, something learned early and carried forward. Sometimes a person does not choose unhappiness. They return to it, because it is known territory. There are no surprises there, no fragile hopes, no expectations waiting to be shattered. And without expectations, there is no disappointment. This is why Dostoyevsky's characters are uneasy with happiness. Happiness demands continuity. It asks to be maintained, protected, sustained. Pain, on the other hand, simply exists. It stays even when you do nothing. It does not ask for effort. When people sabotage their own lives, they rarely experience it as a mistake. More often, it feels like relief. Even in moments of destruction, there is a strange calm beneath the surface. Chaos fits the internal disorder they are already carrying. Peace does not. Peace feels foreign. Peace demands things, honesty, consistency, confrontation, and those demands are heavy. This is where the human relationship with freedom enters the picture. According to Dostoyevsky, the deepest fear is not pain. The deepest fear is freedom. Because freedom means choice. Choice leads to consequences. And consequences demand responsibility. When a person is truly free, they can no longer say, "There was no other way." And so people unconsciously build chains for themselves. Habits, addictions, repeated patterns, familiar failures. All of these narrow freedom. And paradoxically, that narrowing feels comforting. When freedom stands in front of a person, they are alone. Chains mean company, excuses, shared blame, familiar stories. But when the chains fall away, all that remains is naked willpower. And willpower is heavy. People want to believe they are strong enough to carry the weight of their own lives, yet beneath that belief is a quieter fear. What if this life truly belongs to me, and I am living it wrong? That possibility is paralyzing. Because then the failure is no longer fate's, or circumstances, or someone else's. It is yours. So people retreat when faced with freedom. Not consciously, not dramatically. It is an instinctive withdrawal. Like eyes turning away from blinding light, people step back into shadow when clarity becomes too intense. Darkness is familiar. In darkness, details disappear. In darkness, explanations are not required. That is why people sometimes choose uncertainty on purpose. They build complicated relationships. They live unfinished lives. Because an unfinished life is not questioned. An unfinished story cannot be judged. Through sabotage, people create a protected space. Saying it didn't work out feels safer than saying I couldn't do it. Saying circumstances didn't allow it is easier than admitting I was afraid. This is where Dostoyevsky captures the human condition most clearly. The person is both prosecutor and defendant in their own inner courtroom. And in that courtroom, seeking acquittal does not always mean denying the crime. Sometimes it means exaggerating it, condemning oneself, declaring oneself hopeless, irredeemable. Because extreme guilt can also be a way to avoid responsibility. Someone who constantly punishes themselves does not have to change. Someone who says, I'm already broken, is freed from the effort of becoming better. This sounds like surrender, but it is also a form of relief. When people sabotage themselves, they are rarely fully honest with themselves, but they are not completely dishonest either. They live with half-truths. This is just who I am. I've always been unlucky. But they do not examine how they became that way or where they pulled back. Sabotage becomes a silent footnote in the story people tell themselves. It goes unnoticed, yet it shapes the entire narrative. Over time, that footnote is mistaken for fate. But more often than not, it is not fate at all. It is postponed courage. And when courage is postponed long enough, life begins making decisions on a person's behalf. Those decisions tend to lead exactly where the fear has always been waiting. This is why some people wake up at certain points in their lives with a familiar feeling, as if another possibility slipped through their fingers. As if everything could have happened, yet nothing did. This feeling is not accidental. It is the trace left by a will that touched freedom and then retreated. If that trace feels familiar to you, do not rush to blame yourself. It does not mean you are weak. It means you are human. But there is a quiet, uncomfortable distinction here. Understanding is not the same as acceptance. Understanding can soothe you. Acceptance can keep you trapped. At this point, nothing dramatic is required. No vows. No motivational speeches. No sudden transformation. Awareness is enough. Noticing when you retreat. Noticing when you choose chaos. Noticing when you deliberately scatter what could have been built. Because what a person does not notice, they mistake for fate. And what they do notice, they are eventually forced to face. People sabotage their own lives to protect themselves from freedom. Because being free means becoming the author of your own story. And not everyone is ready to write their own life. Some prefer to play a role in a tragedy written by someone else. Because there is comfort there. No responsibility. Only destiny. So pause here, just for a moment, and ask yourself, quietly, without forcing an answer, do you have a breaking point that keeps repeating in your life? Different on the surface, but emotionally the same every time. In relationships, in work, in your inner voice. And even though you recognize it, why does it remain unchanged? Do not answer quickly. This question resists surface-level explanations. It moves slowly, dismantling defenses one by one. First comes denial, then irritation, then justification, and finally, silence. That silence is where the real answer begins to form. Dostoyevsky speaks of an underground within the human soul, a place where logic weakens, morality blurs, and people make quiet agreements with themselves. This is where the most profound acts of self-sabotage are prepared. Not consciously, but not randomly either. Here, people tell themselves stories that make destruction feel inevitable. I was never meant to be happy. It would have ended anyway. This is just how I am. This is the language spoken underground. In this space, harming oneself becomes a form of justice. Guilt demands punishment, and before the world can deliver it, the person delivers it themselves. They believe they do not deserve happiness. When loved, they withdraw. When successful, they dismantle it. A voice inside whispers, "This is too much for you." This is not merely a lack of confidence. It is a deeper conflict with existence itself. For some people, pain is woven into identity. When pain disappears, it is unclear who remains. That is why healing can feel frightening. Healing removes the familiar structure. It demands a new self. People sabotage their lives because destruction fills the space where meaning should be. Destruction is loud, immediate, intense. Meaning is quiet. Meaning waits. Meaning requires patience, and patience is one of the hardest human skills to develop. In Dostoyevsky's world, human beings cannot be reduced to logic. Sometimes people choose the wrong path simply to prove they are free, to feel their will even if it hurts them. The right path can feel too clean, too orderly, too predictable. The wrong path feels intense, dramatic, alive. Pain becomes proof of existence. I feel, pain says, I am here. And so people often choose intensity over peace. Even painful intensity feels better than emptiness. That is why Dostoyevsky's characters are strangely proud as they burn their own lives down, because the fire was theirs. Perhaps, right now, a quiet discomfort has begun to rise within you. Perhaps some words felt uncomfortably close. Perhaps your mind instinctively moved to defend itself. Pay attention. This discomfort does not mean you are wrong. It means something has been touched. People are always most disturbed by what reaches them internally. External criticism stings briefly. Internal disturbance lingers. When someone pauses at a sentence, catches their breath at a word, feels the urge to escape a thought, that is where the crack lies. And that crack is rarely new. It has simply gone unseen for a long time. The mind defends itself because defense feels safe. This is exaggerated. Everyone goes through this. I'm not that bad. These are not lies, but they are partial truths. People regulate how much discomfort they allow inside. Full acceptance would require full confrontation, and confrontation destabilizes the fragile balance built on habits, stories, and excuses. That moment of discomfort is a threshold. One can cross it quickly and return to familiar ground, or stop and look. Looking is difficult, because it opens the possibility of seeing what has been avoided all along. And what becomes clear then is this: the issue is not one behavior, one mistake, or one person. The issue is the relationship a person has with themselves, how they speak internally, when they silence themselves, where they abandon themselves halfway. Discomfort is not an enemy. It arrives like an uninvited guest, but it knows the house better than you do. Instead of pushing it away, listen briefly, because sometimes the most honest truth is hidden inside the very thing you have been running from. And that encounter, however unsettling, is not meant to destroy, only to finally allow something to shift. Why does a person sabotage their own life? Because pain offers a false sense of meaning. Because destruction is the fastest escape from responsibility. Because sometimes being right feels safer than being happy. Because order quiets inner chaos, and some people are not ready for that silence. And now, there will be no final answer. Only a question to leave with you. That thing in your life that keeps holding you back, that trips you in the same place again and again. Is it truly fate, or is it the shadow of a freedom you have not yet dared to face? Do not answer immediately. Sometimes the real issue is not the answer itself, but why the question hurts as much as it does.